Hello and welcome back. I'm so glad you're here today. If you remember when shag carpeting was the height of style, when every kitchen had avocado green appliances, when you spent Saturday nights at the roller rink or watching The Love Boat, then this video is for you. Today we're traveling back to the 1970s, a decade that doesn't always get the respect it deserves. A decade that was colorful, complex, creative, and full of contradictions. For those of you who lived through it, the 1970s probably feels like yesterday in some ways. Maybe you were a teenager discovering disco and rock music. Maybe you were a young adult starting a career, getting married, buying your first home. Maybe you were raising children and navigating a changing world. Or maybe you were a child yourself, playing outside until the streetlights came on, watching Saturday morning cartoons, and living a freedom that kids today can barely imagine. The 1970s were a time of transition. The optimism and activism of the 1960s were giving way to something different. Economic uncertainty was replacing post-war prosperity. Cultural norms were shifting. Technology was changing, though nothing like what was coming. America was finding its way through some difficult times while also experiencing incredible creativity and cultural energy. For the next hour, we're going to explore what daily life was really like in the 1970s. Not just the big historical events, but the everyday experience. The shag carpeting and wood paneling, the 8-track tapes and record albums, the bell-bottoms and platform shoes, the TV dinners and fondue parties, the freedom, the fun, and yes, the challenges too. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's go back to the 1970s together. And please, as we journey through this decade, share your memories in the comments. What do you remember most? What was your favorite TV show? What music did you love? What were you doing in the 70s? Your stories bring this era to life. Let's begin.
The end of the 1960s dream. The 1970s didn't really begin on January 1st, 1970. In many ways, the 60s bled into the early 70s. The counterculture was still there. The social movements were still active. But something was changing. The idealism of the 1960s was meeting the reality of the 1970s. The revolution hadn't come. Instead, there was a kind of hangover, a coming down from the intensity of the previous decade. And the Vietnam War was still going on. Young men were still being drafted. Protests were still happening. The war that had torn the country apart in the 60s was still tearing it apart in the early 70s. Do you remember May 4th, 1970? Kent State University in Ohio. The National Guard fired on student protesters. 4 students were killed. 9 others were wounded. The image of that young woman kneeling by the body of Jeffrey Miller, her arms outstretched in anguish, became one of the defining photographs of the era. Universities shut down across the country in protest. The nation was shocked, divided, angry. If you were in college in 1970, or if you had children in college, you remember the fear and the fury of that time. The draft lottery was something every young man and his family paid attention to. Your birthday could determine your fate. Would your number be called? Would you go to Vietnam? Would you come home? The war finally ended for American troops in 1973. The last American soldiers left Vietnam. POWs came home to parades and yellow ribbons. But the relief was mixed with complicated feelings about a war America hadn't won, about what it had all meant, about what had been sacrificed. And then in 1975, Saigon fell. South Vietnam collapsed. Americans watched on television as helicopters evacuated people from the embassy roof. It was the end of America's longest war, and it didn't feel like victory.
Political climate. Richard Nixon was president as the decade began. He'd been elected in 1968 on promises to end the war and restore law and order. He'd been re-elected in 1972 in a landslide. But then came Watergate. If you lived through Watergate, you remember how it unfolded slowly, like peeling back layers of an onion. First, it seemed like just a burglary at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate complex in June 1972. Then it became clear there was a cover-up. Then the cover-up reached higher and higher. Senate hearings were televised in 1973. People watched, riveted, as the story unfolded. John Dean testified. The existence of White House tape recordings was revealed. What did the president know, and when did he know it, became the question. The Saturday Night Massacre in October 1973. The release of the tapes. "I am not a crook," Nixon declared in November 1973. But the evidence was mounting. And finally, on August 8, 1974, Richard Nixon resigned the presidency. The only president ever to resign. Do you remember watching that resignation speech? Nixon saying, "I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first." Vice President Gerald Ford became president. The next day, he gave a speech that many remember. "My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over." But something had changed. Trust in government had been shaken. The presidency had been tarnished. Cynicism was replacing the civic faith of earlier generations. If you were an adult in the 1970s, watching your children grow up, you might have worried about this loss of faith in institutions. The government, the presidency, even the police and the military, authority figures that had once been respected without question were now being questioned constantly. Gerald Ford tried to heal the nation, but his pardon of Nixon in September 1974 was controversial. Many people felt justice hadn't been served. Ford seemed like a decent man, but he inherited enormous problems. And in 1976, Americans elected Jimmy Carter, a Washington outsider, a peanut farmer and former governor of Georgia who promised, "I will never lie to you." Carter represented something Americans wanted: honesty, decency, a fresh start. But he would face his own challenges as president, especially as the decade wore on.
Economic troubles began. And then there was the economy. In October 1973, the Arab members of OPEC imposed an oil embargo on the United States. This was in response to American support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War. Suddenly, oil was scarce and expensive. Gas prices skyrocketed. Do you remember the gas lines? Cars lined up for blocks, sometimes for miles, waiting to buy gasoline. You might wait for an hour or more. Sometimes you get to the front of the line and they'd be out of gas. Some places instituted odd-even rationing. If your license plate ended in an odd number, you could buy gas on odd-numbered days. Even numbers on even days. People got creative. Some siphoned gas from one car to another. Some bought multiple cars so they could always have one that matched the day. It was frustrating, frightening even. America had always had abundant, cheap gasoline. Now we were dependent on foreign oil, and we were vulnerable. The oil crisis changed American life. Gas-guzzling muscle cars suddenly seemed like dinosaurs. Smaller, more fuel-efficient cars, many of them Japanese, started gaining market share. The speed limit was reduced to 55 miles per hour nationwide to save fuel. 55 saves lives, and Drive 55 became slogans. But it wasn't just gasoline. The oil crisis affected everything. Heating costs rose, the price of goods that depended on transportation rose, inflation started climbing. And this was the beginning of something economists called stagflation, stagnation plus inflation. The economy wasn't growing, but prices were rising. Unemployment was increasing, but so was the cost of living. This wasn't supposed to happen according to economic theory, but it was happening. If you were trying to manage a household budget in the mid-1970s, you felt it. Your paycheck wasn't going as far, prices kept rising, jobs felt less secure. The easy prosperity of the post-war decades was ending. The economic anxiety that would define much of the late 20th century was beginning.
The 1970s home. But let's leave the big picture for a moment and talk about daily life, about your home and family. Homes in the 1970s had a very distinctive look. If you lived in a typical house in the 70s, you probably had shag carpeting. Thick, plush, deep pile carpet in colors like avocado green, harvest gold, orange, or brown. Shag carpet was everywhere. Living rooms, bedrooms, sometimes even bathrooms. You vacuumed it with a rake. Things fell into it and disappeared. But it was comfortable, warm, and very 70s. Your kitchen appliances were probably avocado green or harvest gold. These were the colors of the decade. Your refrigerator, your stove, your dishwasher, all coordinated in these earthy tones. Wood paneling covered walls in family rooms, basements, dens. That dark wood, often fake, created a warm, cozy feeling. At least, that's what people thought at the time. If you had a more modern home, you might have had a conversation pit, a sunken area in your living room with built-in seating. Very stylish, very 70s. And the decor, oh, the decor. Macrame plant hangers everywhere, with spider plants or ferns hanging in them. Lava lamps bubbling in the corner. Beanbag chairs for casual seating. Posters on the walls. Maybe rock bands, maybe Farrah Fawcett, maybe a sunset or motivational saying. Orange and brown and gold were the colors of the decade. Geometric patterns, floral prints, earth tones everywhere. If you entertained, you probably had a fondue set. Fondue parties were hugely popular. Cheese fondue, chocolate fondue. Everyone gathered around the pot with their long forks, dipping bread or fruit. And the crock pot. What a revolutionary appliance! You could throw ingredients in before work and dinner would be ready when you got home. Pot roast, stews, soups, all cooking slowly while you were away.
Changes in family structure. Family life was changing in the 1970s in ways that would have seemed unlikely just a decade earlier. Divorce rates were rising. The divorce rate nearly doubled during the 1970s. Divorce became more socially acceptable, less stigmatized. No-fault divorce laws made it easier. If you got divorced in the 1970s, you might have felt some judgment, but not like previous generations would have. Single-parent households were becoming more common, and more mothers were working outside the home. The women's liberation movement was changing expectations and opportunities. Economic necessity was also a factor. One income often wasn't enough anymore. This meant children were spending more time alone or with babysitters. Latchkey kids became a phenomenon. Children who came home from school to an empty house, let themselves in with their own key, and took care of themselves until parents got home. If you were a latchkey kid, you remember that independence. You'd come home, maybe watch some TV, have a snack, do your homework. You were responsible for yourself. It was freedom, but it was also a sign of changing family structures. Gender roles were being questioned and renegotiated. Women were demanding equality at home and at work. Some men embraced this. Others resisted. Families were figuring out new arrangements: who cooked, who cleaned, who took care of children, who worked. Stay-at-home dads were rare, but starting to exist. This was radical at the time.
Kitchen and cooking. If you cooked in the 1970s, convenience was increasingly important. TV dinners weren't new, but they were everywhere. Swanson TV dinners in their aluminum trays. You heated them in the oven and ate them in front of the television. Frozen foods were a major part of grocery shopping. Fish sticks, frozen vegetables, frozen pizzas, pot pies. Hamburger Helper appeared in 1971. 1 pound of ground beef plus a box of Hamburger Helper, and you had a meal. It stretched your budget and saved time. Tang, the orange drink that astronauts supposedly drink in space, was in every kitchen. Jell-O molds were still popular. Salads made with Jell-O, vegetables or fruits suspended in gelatin? It seems strange now, but it was normal then. But there was also a counter-movement. The health food movement was growing. Natural foods, whole grains, less processed food. Granola, whole wheat bread, brown rice. Some people were very into health food and natural living. Others thought it was hippie nonsense and stuck with their meat and potatoes. And late in the decade, microwave ovens started appearing in homes. They'd been around for commercial use, but in the late 70s, they became affordable for home use. The idea that you could cook food in minutes seemed almost magical, though early microwave food often had that distinctive rubbery texture. Tupperware parties were social events. A woman would host a party at her home. Friends would come over, socialize, and buy Tupperware. The hostess would get free products based on sales. It was shopping, socializing, and a way for some women to earn money, all wrapped up together.
Daily routines. Life in the 1970s was becoming more casual, more relaxed than previous decades. The formality of the 1950s and early 60s was fading. Families didn't always sit down for formal dinners together. With both parents often working, with children involved in various activities, schedules were more complex. Sometimes dinner was catch as catch can, everyone eating at different times, heating up leftovers, grabbing something quick. Casual Friday was starting to become a thing in some workplaces. The idea that you could wear jeans to work on Friday seemed revolutionary. Parenting styles were becoming less strict. The children should be seen and not heard mentality was fading. Kids had more say, more freedom, more voice in family decisions. Some people worried this was too permissive. Others saw it as progress, as treating children with more respect. Television was an increasingly central part of family life. By the mid-1970s, the average American was watching several hours of TV per day. TV was how you relaxed, how you entertained yourself, how you stayed informed. But children still played outside constantly. You went out after breakfast and came home for lunch. Out again until dinner. Out again after dinner until the streetlights came on. Your mother didn't know exactly where you were just outside playing, and that was considered perfectly normal and safe.
Growing up in the 1970s. If you were a child in the 1970s, you had a kind of freedom that seems almost unimaginable today. You rode your bike everywhere, to friends' houses, to the store, all around the neighborhood. No helmet, no adult supervision, you just went. You built forts in the woods or in vacant lots. You played in construction sites. You explored drainage ditches and creeks. Your parents didn't organize play dates for you. You just went to friends' houses and knocked on the door. Can Johnny come out and play? You played street games, kickball, foursquare, hopscotch, capture the flag. Whole neighborhoods full of kids playing together. Kids of different ages, all playing together. The older ones looking out for the younger ones. You came home when you were thirsty or hungry or when the streetlights came on. That was the rule. Be home when the streetlights came on. You entertained yourself. You used your imagination. You didn't have screens or devices. You had the outdoors, your friends, and your imagination. Popular toys and games. The toys of the 1970s, if you were a kid then, you remember them vividly. In 1977, everything changed when Star Wars came out. Suddenly, every kid wanted Star Wars action figures. Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Han Solo, Darth Vader, Chewbacca. You collected them, played with them endlessly, recreated scenes from the movie. The Millennium Falcon, X-Wing fighters, the Death Star playset. These toys were everywhere, and if you didn't get them for Christmas or your birthday, you were disappointed. Hot Wheels and Matchbox cars. You had dozens of them. You built tracks, created cities, raced them, the orange track pieces, the loop-the-loops, the crashes, the Evel Knievel stunt cycle. You'd wind it up and send Evel flying through the air. He was the daredevil everyone admired. Big wheels and green machines. Low-riding tricycles, you pedaled furiously, then pulled the handbrake to spin out. The sound of plastic wheels on pavement, the thrill of speed and danger. Easy bake ovens for girls, though some boys had them too. You made tiny cakes and cookies using a light bulb as the heat source. They actually tasted pretty good. Rock'em sock'em robots, two robots punching each other until one's head popped up. Light bright, you pushed colored pegs into a black background, turned on the light, and created glowing pictures. Viewmaster, those 3D image viewers with the circular reels, you'd look through it and click through scenes from cartoons, movies, or tourist destinations. Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. Those egg-shaped figures with weighted bottoms. Board games were huge. Hungry Hungry Hippos, frantically pushing buttons to make your hippo eat marbles. Operation, using metal tweezers to remove body parts without touching the sides and making the buzzer sound. Battleship, calling out coordinates trying to sink your opponent's ships. These toys seem simple now, but they provided hours of entertainment.
Saturday morning rituals. Saturday morning was sacred if you were a kid in the 1970s. You woke up early, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. Saturday morning cartoons were on. You'd pour yourself a huge bowl of cereal. The sugarier, the better. Cap'n Crunch, Fruit Loops, Lucky Charms, Cocoa Puffs, Trix. You'd sit in front of the TV in your pajamas and watch cartoons for hours. Scooby-Doo, where are you? Super Friends, with Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman. HR Puffin Stuff with its psychedelic weirdness. Land of the Lost with the Slee Stacks. The Bugs Bunny Roadrunner Show. Between cartoons, you'd watch Schoolhouse Rock. I'm Just a Bill taught you how laws are made. Conjunction Junction taught you grammar. 3 is a magic number taught you multiplication. You sang along without realizing you were learning. Your parents loved Saturday morning cartoons because it meant a few hours where they didn't have to entertain you. You were quiet, occupied, happy. School experience. School in the 1970s was different from what came before and what would come after. Some schools experimented with open classrooms, large spaces without walls, multiple classes happening at once. The theory was it would encourage cooperation and flexibility. In practice, it was often just noisy and chaotic. New math was being taught, abstract concepts, and different methods. Parents were confused and frustrated trying to help with homework. I don't understand this new way, just do it the way I learned it. But much of school was still traditional. You still had to learn cursive writing. You practiced it over and over until your handwriting was neat and legible. Film strips were a highlight. The teacher would wheel in the projector, thread the film strip, and you'd watch while a cassette tape beeped to signal when to advance to the next frame. Any film strip was a break from regular lessons, so you loved them. Overhead projectors were the teacher's primary tool. They'd write on transparent sheets with markers, and the image would project on the wall. If you were chosen to operate the overhead projector, you felt important. And the mimeograph machine, that smell, purple or blue ink on slightly damp paper, you'd sniff the freshly printed worksheets when the teacher handed them out. Everyone did it. Dress codes were more relaxed than in previous decades. Jeans were acceptable in most schools now. T-shirts was fine. Girls could wear pants. The strict dress codes of the 50s and 60s were gone. You could express yourself a bit more. PE class was often intense. Dodgeball was played without mercy. If you were athletic, you loved it. If you weren't, you dreaded it. The rope climb, the parachute games, square dancing lessons that made everyone uncomfortable. School lunch was its own experience. Rectangular pizza. How did they make it rectangular? Chocolate milk in little cartons, tater tots and fish sticks, mystery meat that you ate because you were hungry.
After school. If you were a latchkey kid, after school had its own routine.
You'd walk home, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. You'd let yourself in with your key. The house was empty and quiet. Maybe you'd watch TV, after-school specials about serious topics, game shows, reruns. Maybe you'd have a snack, a bowl of cereal, Ritz crackers and cheese, a Hostess snack cake. You'd do your homework, or at least you were supposed to. Then you'd go outside and play until your parents got home. You knew you were supposed to come inside if strangers approached. You knew not to answer the door. You knew basic safety rules. But mostly, you were on your own, and you handled it. It built independence, but it also meant growing up a little faster than kids in previous generations. Television's evolution. Television in the 1970s was king. By now, color TV was standard. If you still had a black and white TV, you were behind the times. You still only had 3 major networks: ABC, CBS, NBC, plus PBS, which showed Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and educational programming. But those 3 networks gave you plenty to watch. All in the Family premiered in 1971 and became a cultural phenomenon. Archie Bunker, the lovable bigot arguing with his liberal son-in-law Mike. The show dealt with controversial topics: racism, sexism, homosexuality, women's liberation. It was groundbreaking and controversial. Everyone watched it. MASH started in 1972. Set during the Korean War, it was really about Vietnam. Funny and heartbreaking, sometimes in the same episode. Hawkeye, Trapper John, Radar, Hot Lips, Colonel Blake. It ran for 11 years, longer than the Korean War itself. Little House on the Prairie started in 1974. The Ingalls family on the frontier, facing hardship with courage and love. Half the country cried every week. Charlie's Angels debuted in 1976. 3 beautiful women fighting crime in California. Farrah Fawcett's feathered hair became the most copied hairstyle in America.
The $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman, Lee Majors and Lindsay Wagner with their bionic parts, fighting crime and performing superhuman feats. We can rebuild him. We have the technology. Wonder Woman with Linda Carter spinning into her costume, deflecting bullets with her bracelets. And late in the decade, Saturday Night Live premiered in 1975. Live comedy on late Saturday night. Edgy, irreverent, often controversial. The original not ready for prime-time players. Chevy Chase, John Belushi, Gilda Radner, Dan Aykroyd, Jane Curtin, Garrett Morris, Lorraine Newman. TV Guide was essential. You needed it to know what was on and when. You'd check it to plan your evening. You'd mark the shows you wanted to watch. You still had to get up to change the channel. Remote controls existed but weren't common yet. The kids were the remote control. Go change the channel. Adjusting the rabbit ear antenna to get a better picture was an art form. Someone would hold the antenna while someone else watched the screen. A little to the left. No, back. There! Don't move! Movies and cinema. Movies in the 1970s experienced a renaissance. New Hollywood directors were making groundbreaking films. Jaws came out in 1975 and invented the summer blockbuster. People lined up around the block to see it. The mechanical shark, the music, da-dum, da-dum. You were afraid to go in the water that summer. Then in 1977, Star Wars changed everything. No one had seen anything like it. The special effects, the story, the characters. You went to see it multiple times. You bought the toys. You memorized the dialogue. May the Force be with you. Enter the language. Rocky won Best Picture in 1976. The story of an underdog boxer getting a shot at the title. Yo, Adrian! The training montage running up the steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. It was inspiring and emotional. Grease came out in 1978. John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John. You knew every song. You're the One That I Want, Summer Nights, Greased Lightning.
Saturday Night Fever in 1977 launched the disco craze to new heights. Travolta's white suit, the dance floor, the Bee Gees soundtrack, everyone wanted to dance like that. Disaster movies were huge in the 70s. The Poseidon Adventure, a cruise ship flipping over. The Towering Inferno, a skyscraper on fire. Earthquake, exactly what it sounds like. These big-budget spectacles with all-star casts. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Alien, Superman, all late 70s. The decade was redefining what movies could do. Drive-in movie theaters were still popular. You'd pile the family into the car, maybe smuggle in some snacks, and watch a double feature under the stars. But indoor theaters were changing too. Multiplexes were opening in shopping malls. Instead of one screen, theaters had 4 or 6 or more screens. More choices, more showtimes, more convenience.
Music revolution. The music of the 1970s was incredibly diverse. There was something for everyone, and the decade produced some of the most memorable music ever made. Disco dominated the late 70s. Donna Summer, the Bee Gees, Gloria Gaynor, Chic, Village People, Stayin' Alive, La Freak, I Will Survive, YMCA. Disco wasn't just music, it was a culture. Discos and nightclubs with their mirror balls and flashing lights. Studio 54 in New York was the most famous. Celebrities, glamour, excess. Roller disco combined two crazes. Roller skating rinks played disco music. You'd skate around and around under the lights. Couples skate, where they dim the lights and couples would skate together. But disco wasn't for everyone. Rock fans often hated it. Disco sucks became a rallying cry. There was even a disco demolition night at a baseball game in Chicago in 1979 where they blew up disco records. Rock music in the 70s was incredibly diverse. Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, the Eagles, Fleetwood Mac, stadium rock, progressive rock, southern rock, hard rock. The Eagles' Hotel California was everywhere in 1977. Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon stayed on the charts for years. Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven became the most requested song on rock radio. Singer-songwriters were huge. Carole King, James Taylor, Cat Simon, Carly Simon, Elton John. Personal, emotional, acoustic-based music. Carole King's Tapestry album was in everyone's collection. Soul and funk were thriving. Stevie Wonder, Earth, Wind and Fire, Parliament Funkadelic, Marvin Gaye. Complex, sophisticated, groovy music. And punk rock emerged late in the decade. The Ramones, the Sex Pistols, the Clash, raw, angry, rebellious. A reaction against the slick production of mainstream rock and disco. You listen to music on 8-track tapes in your car. Those chunky cartridges that clicked and changed tracks in the middle of songs. Cassette tapes were becoming popular. Smaller, more portable, better sound quality. You could make mixtapes. Record your favorite songs from the radio or from albums. Making a mixtape for someone was an art form and a declaration of love. Record albums were still the primary way to buy music. You'd go to the record store, flip through the albums, look at the cover art. Buying an album was an investment. You'd take it home, carefully remove it from the sleeve, place it on the turntable, drop the needle, and listen to the whole thing. Album covers were art. You'd study them while listening, reading the liner notes, learning about the musicians.
Fashion and style. The fashion of the 1970s is memorable. Looking back, some of it seems wild, but at the time, it seemed cool, stylish, and modern. Bell-bottoms and hip-huggers were the pants of the decade. Jeans that hugged your hips and flared out at the bottom. The wider the flare, the better. Some bell-bottoms were so wide they'd drag on the ground. Platform shoes, for men and women. Thick soles, sometimes 4 or 5 inches high. They made you taller and made a statement. How you walked in them without breaking an ankle, no one knows. Polyester was the fabric of the decade. Polyester pants, polyester shirts, polyester suits. It was modern, wrinkle-resistant, affordable. It was also sweaty and uncomfortable, but everyone wore it.
Leisure suits for men, matching jacket and pants and polyester, often in colors like powder blue or tan, worn with wide-collared shirts, often open to show chest hair and a gold chain. Hot pants, very short shorts for women. Mini skirts that were really, really mini. Tube tops and halter tops, tank tops and crop tops. A lot of skin was showing in the 70s, especially in summer. Mood rings changed color based on your body temperature, supposedly reflecting your mood. Chokers, long pendant necklaces, love beads. Hair was big and wild. Long hair for men and women. Feathered hair like Farrah Fawcett. Shag cuts with lots of layers. Perms were popular. Everyone wanted curly hair. Afros, natural hair worn big and round. This was a statement of black pride and beauty. Afro picks with fists on the handle. Sideburns for men, long, thick sideburns. Mustaches were popular. Full beards, Fu Manchu mustaches, handlebar mustaches. Facial hair was a thing. The colors of the 70s, earth tones mostly. Brown, orange, yellow, avocado green, harvest gold, but also bright colors, hot pink, electric blue, lime green. Disco fashion was even more extreme. Sequins, glitter, metallic fabrics, tight pants, flowing shirts with huge collars, platform shoes with goldfish in the heels. Yes, that was a real thing. Looking at photos from the 70s now, you might laugh, but at the time, this was fashion, this was style, and you looked good.
Home technology. Technology in the 1970s was simpler than today, but it was evolving. Telephones in your home were likely still rotary dial for much of the decade. You'd stick your finger in the hole and rotate the dial for each number. Dialing a long phone number took time. Push-button phones were arriving, touch-tone phones. They made cool beep sounds. You could dial faster. This seemed modern and high-tech. The phone cord, long and curly, sometimes stretching across the room. You'd pace while talking, or you'd stretch the cord to get privacy. The cord would get tangled and you'd have to untangle it. Most families had one phone for the whole household. No answering machines in the early 70s. If you weren't home when someone called, they'd call back later, or they'd just show up at your door. Answering machines started appearing in homes in the mid to late 70s. Recording your outgoing message felt awkward at first. Leaving a message on someone's machine felt weird too. But it was revolutionary. You could know who called even if you missed them. There was no call waiting in the early 70s. If you were on the phone, anyone else calling got a busy signal. They'd have to keep trying until you hung up. Call waiting was introduced later in the decade. That little beep telling you someone else was trying to call. Do you switch? Do you ignore it? New technology, new etiquette questions. Calling long distance was still expensive and special. You watched the clock. I should let you go. This is long distance. Calling collect was common. The operator would call and ask if they'd accept charges. Kids calling home from college would call collect and say their name as, "Mom, pick me up at the station," really fast. Mom would refuse the charges but got the message.
Entertainment technology. Your stereo system was a major piece of furniture. Console stereos, big wooden cabinets with a turntable, radio, maybe an 8-track player, or component systems, separate turntable, receiver, tape deck, speakers. You'd carefully set it all up, connect all the wires. Record players were the heart of music listening. You'd carefully remove the record from its sleeve, holding it by the edges, place it on the turntable, start it spinning, gently lower the needle, but crackle and pop before the music started. 8-track tapes were popular, especially in cars. Those big, chunky cartridges, they'd play continuously in a loop. Sometimes they'd click and change tracks in the middle of a song. The sound quality wasn't great, but it was portable music. Cassette tapes were taking over by mid-decade. Smaller, better sound, you could rewind and fast forward. Cassette decks in your stereo system. Portable cassette players you could carry around. Making mixtapes became an art form. You'd record songs from the radio, trying to start recording right when the song began and stop before the DJ started talking. Or you'd record from your albums onto tape. You'd carefully arrange the songs in the perfect order. You'd make a mixtape for someone you liked. It was a gesture of affection. Reel-to-reel tape decks for serious audio enthusiasts. Big reels of tape threading through the machine, complicated to operate, but excellent sound quality. And then, late in the decade, video games came home. Pong was the first, incredibly simple by today's standards. 2 paddles, a dot representing a ball, you played electronic tennis. But it was amazing in 1972. The Atari 2600 launched in 1977. Cartridge-based games you could swap out. Space Invaders, Asteroids, Pac-Man. The graphics were primitive, blocky, pixelated, but you'd sit for hours playing them. This was the beginning of home video gaming. Kids begged for Atari for Christmas. VCRs started appearing in homes in the late 70s. Very expensive at first, hundreds of dollars, but revolutionary. You could record TV shows and watch them later. You could rent movies and watch them at home. The format war, Betamax versus VHS. Beta had better quality, but VHS had longer recording time and better marketing. Eventually, VHS would win, but in the late 70s, it wasn't clear yet.
Photography and memories. Photography was still all film. Kodak Instamatic cameras were everywhere. Simple point-and-shoot cameras that used 110 film cartridges. Drop the cartridge in, close the back, and you were ready. You'd take photos of birthdays, holidays, vacations, everyday moments. But you couldn't take too many. Film was limited and cost money to develop. You had 12, 24, or 36 exposures per roll. You made each shot count. When you finished a roll, you took it to the drugstore. You drop it off and pick up the developed photos a week later. That anticipation of waiting to see how your pictures turned out. Sometimes they'd be blurry, overexposed, or someone had their eyes closed. But sometimes you'd get a perfect shot. The Polaroid instant camera was magical. You took a picture, and it came out of the camera immediately. You'd watch it develop right before your eyes, the image appearing slowly from white. You'd shake it, even though you weren't supposed to. It was expensive. The film cost a lot per picture. But for special occasions, that instant gratification was worth it. Slide projectors for family slideshows. Your dad would set up the projector and screen. You'd dim the lights. Click, 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 through slides of your vacation. Sometimes the slide would be upside down or backwards. These shows could go on forever. Super 8 movie cameras for shooting home movies. Silent film in little cartridges. You'd shoot family events, vacations, holidays. Later, you'd project them on a screen or the wall. Jerky, silent footage of your childhood. These were how memories were preserved. Not thousands of photos on your phone, but carefully taken, developed, printed, and saved photos. Precious and limited.
Communication. Communication was slower and more deliberate than today. You wrote letters, real letters, by hand or typed on a typewriter. You'd write to distant friends and relatives, to your kids at college, to pen pals. You'd put the letter in an envelope, add a stamp, mail it, wait days or a week for a reply. Long-distance phone calls were expensive. You saved them for important occasions, birthdays, holidays, emergencies. I'll write you a letter was how you kept in touch most of the time. Telegrams still existed for urgent news. You'd go to Western Union and send a telegram. Receiving a telegram usually meant something important, often something bad. There was no email, no text messages, no instant messaging. If you wanted to reach someone, you called their home phone and hoped they were there, or you sent a letter and waited, or you'd just show up at their house. Making plans meant committing to them. You'd make plans to meet someone at a specific time and place. If you were late, they'd wait. If you couldn't make it, there was no way to let them know. You just didn't show up, and they'd figure something happened. People were more reliable about keeping plans because there was no way to cancel at the last minute. Shopping and commerce. Shopping was changing in the 1970s. Malls were becoming the center of retail. Indoor shopping malls with multiple stores, food courts, movie theaters. Climate-controlled, convenient, modern. Going to the mall became a social activity, especially for teenagers. You'd meet friends at the mall, walk around, look at stores, hang out. The mall was the place to be. Department stores were still thriving. Sears, JCPenney, Macy's, local department stores. These anchor stores drew people to the mall. The Sears catalog was still important, especially in rural areas. That thick book arriving in the mail, you'd look through it, dreaming about what you'd buy. Order by mail, wait weeks for delivery. Trading stamps were fading but still around. S&H green stamps, top value stamps. You'd collect them, lick them, paste them in books, redeem them for merchandise. Layaway was common. If you couldn't afford something all at once, the store would hold it. You'd make payments over time. When you'd paid in full, you'd take it home. Credit cards were becoming more common. Bank AmeriCard, which became Visa, and MasterCharge, which became MasterCard. But many people were still wary of credit. Don't buy what you can't afford, was the wisdom. No debit cards yet. You wrote checks for purchases or paid cash. Balancing your checkbook was a necessary skill.
Cars of the 1970s. Cars in the 1970s went through a dramatic transformation. At the beginning of the decade, American muscle cars were still around. Big engines, lots of power, terrible gas mileage. Pontiac GTO, Dodge Charger, Chevelle SS, these were the cars young people dreamed about. But the oil crisis changed everything. Suddenly, those gas guzzlers seemed impractical, even irresponsible. The average car got maybe 10 or 12 miles per gallon. With gas expensive and sometimes unavailable, that was a problem. American manufacturers started making smaller, more fuel-efficient cars. But they weren't very good at it at first. The cars were smaller, but not necessarily more reliable or well-made. Japanese cars started gaining serious market share. Toyota, Datsun, which became Nissan, Honda. These cars were small, fuel-efficient, and reliable. Americans started buying them in large numbers. This began the decline of American automotive dominance. Station wagons were the family car of the 70s. Long, with wood paneling on the sides, fake wood, but it looked classy. 3 rows of seats. The back row faced backward. Kids loved sitting back there waving at cars behind you. No car seats or seat belts were required for kids. Children bounced around in the back seat or the cargo area. Sometimes 8 or 10 people would pile into one station wagon. No air conditioning in many cars. You rolled down the windows manually with a hand crank. On hot days, you just sweated. 8-track players were built into car dashboards. You'd slide in an 8-track tape and listen while driving. The quality was terrible by today's standards, but it was better than just radio.
Gas stations and driving. Going to the gas station was different in the 1970s. Full-service gas stations were standard. You'd pull up, and an attendant would come out. Fill her up. He'd pump your gas, check your oil, wash your windshield, check your tire pressure. All part of the service. Self-service gas stations existed, but were less common. They were cheaper. You saved money by pumping your own gas. During the gas crisis, gas stations had long lines. Cars lined up for blocks. You might wait an hour to get gas. Sometimes you'd get to the front of the line and they'd be out of gas. Odd-even rationing in some places. If your license plate ended in an odd number, you could only buy gas on odd-numbered days. even numbers on even days. People got creative and sometimes desperate. Some bought second cars just to have access to gas on both odd and even days. The national speed limit was lowered to 55 miles per hour in 1974 to save fuel. 55 saves lives became the slogan. This would remain federal law until 1995. Police enforced it strictly. If you drove faster than 55 on the highway, you risked a ticket. Paper maps were essential for any trip beyond your local area. No GPS, no smartphones, no navigation systems. You'd plan your route on a map before leaving. Keep the map in the car and check it along the way. Getting lost was common. You'd have to stop and ask for directions at gas stations. "Excuse me, how do I get to?" AAA triptychs were popular for long trips. You'd go to AAA, tell them where you were going. They'd make you a custom strip map showing your route with maps of each section of the trip, highlighting the roads you should take. CB radios became hugely popular in the mid-70s. Citizens band radio, two-way radios in your car. Truckers used them to communicate. Regular people started getting them too. You'd have a CB handle, a nickname. "Breaker, breaker, this is Rubber Duck." You'd warn other drivers about Smokey, police, or traffic jams. It was a whole culture, with its own language and community. The movie Smokey and the Bandit in 1977 made CB radios even more popular.
Family vacations meant road trips in the 1970s. You'd pack up the station wagon, luggage strapped to the roof rack. The whole family would pile in. Mom, dad, kids, maybe the dog. No portable entertainment, no tablets, no DVD players, no video games. You sang songs, played card games like I Spy, the license plate game, 20 questions. Are we there yet was asked 100 times. Fights broke out in the back seat. "He's touching me! Stay on your side!" Dad would threaten to pull over. You'd stop at rest areas along the highway, picnic tables, vending machines, restrooms. You'd stretch your legs, use the bathroom, maybe eat the sandwiches Mom packed. Roadside attractions were a big part of travel. Mystery spots, reptile farms, giant statues, caverns, scenic overlooks. See Rock City signs painted on barn roofs. Disney World opened in Florida in 1971. Suddenly, there was a new destination for family vacations. Going to Disney World was a huge deal. You'd save up for it, plan for months, and it would be the trip of a lifetime. Camping was popular and affordable. KOA campgrounds across the country. You'd stay in tents or a pop-up camper. Cook on a camp stove, make s'mores at the campfire. It was cheap and adventurous. Staying at Holiday Inn or Howard Johnson's was standard for road trips. These chain motels were everywhere, reliable and affordable. Orange roofs, swimming pools, restaurant attached. The excitement of staying in a motel, even a cheap one, was real for kids. TV in the room, ice machine down the hall, a pool to swim in. Simple pleasures.
The workforce. The workplace was changing in the 1970s, though more slowly than other aspects of life. Manufacturing was still strong in America, though beginning to decline. Factories employed millions of workers in good-paying union jobs, but foreign competition was increasing. Japanese and German manufacturers were making better products more efficiently. The service economy was growing. More jobs in retail, healthcare, education, finance. Fewer jobs making things, more jobs providing services. More women were entering the workforce, not just as secretaries and nurses and teachers, though those were still the most common jobs for women, but also in previously male-dominated fields. Women were becoming doctors, lawyers, business executives, though still in small numbers. This created tension in some workplaces. Some men welcomed female colleagues. Others resented them, felt threatened by them. The Equal Rights Amendment was being debated throughout the 70s. It would have guaranteed equal rights regardless of sex. It passed Congress in 1972, but needed to be ratified by the states. Supporters like Gloria Steinem campaigned for it. Opponents like Phyllis Schlafly campaigned against it. Ultimately, it fell just short of the states needed for ratification, but the debate showed how much gender roles were being questioned. Secretarial pools were still common in offices. Rows of desks with women typing. IBM Selectric typewriters, those ball-shaped typing elements, not individual keys. They were faster, cleaner, more efficient than old typewriters. Carbon paper for making copies. You'd layer carbon paper between sheets, type once, get multiple copies. Your fingers would get covered in carbon smudges. Correction fluid, whiteout, or liquid paper to fix typing mistakes. Paint over the error, wait for it to dry, type the correction. Copy machines existed, but were expensive and less common than they'd become. The Xerox machine was revolutionary when offices got them. Smoking was still allowed in most offices. People smoked at their desks while working. Ashtrays everywhere, the smoke filling rooms. Non-smokers just had to deal with it. The 9-to-5 workday was standard. You worked Monday through Friday. Weekends were for rest and family. Work-life balance was more clearly defined than it would become in later decades.
Economic challenges. The economy of the 1970s was challenging in ways Americans hadn't experienced in decades. Stagflation. Stagnation plus inflation. The economy wasn't growing, but prices were rising. This wasn't supposed to happen according to traditional economic theory. Inflation was the big concern. The inflation rate reached double digits by the late 70s. Prices were rising 10%, 12%, even 13% per year. If you were trying to manage a household budget, this was devastating. Your paycheck might be the same, but it bought less each month. Groceries cost more, gas cost more, everything cost more. Interest rates rose to combat inflation. By the end of the decade, mortgage rates were in the teens, 15%, 16%, even 18% interest on a home loan. This made buying a house much harder. Unemployment was also a concern. The unemployment rate climbed to nearly 9% in 1975. Jobs felt less secure. The lifetime employment at one company was becoming less common. American industry was struggling. Steel mills were closing. Auto manufacturers were losing market share to foreign competitors. The Rust Belt was beginning to rust. Union power was still strong in the 70s, but beginning to wane. Unions had won good wages and benefits for workers, but as industries declined, union membership would start declining too.
Cost of living. Let's talk about what things cost in the 1970s. At the beginning of the decade, you could buy a new house for around $23,000. By the end of the decade, it was closer to $60,000. That increase reflected inflation more than home improvement. A new car in 1970 might cost $3,500. By 1979, $6,000 or more. Used cars were much cheaper. You could get a decent used car for $1,000 or less. Gas was 36 cents a gallon in 1970. After the oil crisis, it jumped to over $1. By the end of the decade, it was around $1.20. This felt expensive. Gas had been cheap for so long. A gallon of milk was about $1.32. A loaf of bread was around 25 cents early in the decade, 50 cents by the end. Going to the movies cost about $1.50 to $2, cheap entertainment for an evening. A postage stamp was 8 cents in 1970. By 1978, it was 15 cents, nearly doubling in one decade. The average household income was around $9,000 in 1970. By 1979, it was about $17,000.
Wages were rising, but not as fast as prices. People felt squeezed. They were working hard, but they weren't getting ahead. The easy prosperity of the 50s and 60s was gone.
Women's liberation. The women's liberation movement, or women's lib as it was often called, was a major force in the 1970s. Gloria Steinem became a prominent voice and face of the movement. Ms. Magazine launched in 1972, a magazine by, for, and about women. Not recipes and fashion, but serious articles about women's issues, politics, careers. The movement demanded equality, equal pay for equal work, equal opportunities, equal rights under the law. The Equal Rights Amendment debate divided the country. The ERA said equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Seems simple enough, but opponents argued it would eliminate protections for women, force women into combat, require unisex bathrooms. The debate got heated and personal. Title IX was passed in 1972. It prohibited sex-based discrimination in schools and colleges receiving federal funding. This revolutionized women's sports. Before Title IX, few schools had women's sports teams. After Title IX, women's sports exploded. More opportunities, more scholarships, more recognition. Billie Jean King played Bobby Riggs in the Battle of the Sexes tennis match in 1973. Riggs, a former champion, claimed women couldn't compete with men. King, in her prime, beat him decisively. 90 million people watched worldwide. It was a symbolic victory for women's equality. In homes across America, couples were renegotiating roles. Who cooked? Who cleaned? Who took care of kids? Who worked outside the home? Traditional answers to these questions were being challenged. Some households adapted, others resisted. It created tension and conversations that hadn't happened before.
Civil rights continuation. The civil rights movement of the 1960s had won major legal victories. The 70s were about implementing those changes and continuing the struggle. Busing to achieve school integration was controversial and divisive. Courts ordered students bused from their neighborhoods to other schools to achieve racial balance. Some people supported it as necessary for integration. Others opposed it, sometimes violently. Boston had riots over busing in 1974. Affirmative action programs aimed to increase opportunities for minorities and women in employment, in college admissions, in government contracts. Supporters saw it as necessary to overcome historical discrimination. Opponents saw it as reverse discrimination. The Roots miniseries aired in 1977. 8 consecutive nights showing the history of slavery and one black family from Africa to freedom. Over 130 million people watched. It brought the reality of slavery into American living rooms in a way that hadn't happened before. It sparked conversations about race, history, and justice. Soul Train was the Black American bandstand. Music, dancing, fashion, culture. Don Cornelius hosting, introducing America to soul, funk, and R&B. Blaxploitation films, a controversial term for films targeted at black audiences. Shaft, Superfly, Foxy Brown. Criticized by some as stereotypical, celebrated by others as showing black heroes and power. Progress was being made, but slowly and unevenly. Racism persisted. Discrimination continued. But opportunities were expanding, and more black Americans were entering the middle class.
Environmental movement. The environmental movement became a major force in the 1970s. The first Earth Day was April 22, 1970.
20 million Americans participated in demonstrations and teach-ins. It was one of the largest demonstrations in American history. Suddenly, pollution, conservation, and environmental protection were mainstream concerns. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, was established in 1970. For the first time, the federal government had an agency focused on environmental protection. Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, all passed in the early 70s. These laws regulated pollution, protected wildlife, and aimed to preserve natural resources. Recycling began in many communities, separating glass, paper, and aluminum. Return deposits on bottles encouraged recycling. Littering became socially unacceptable. Give a hoot, don't pollute, with Woodsy Owl, the Crying Indian commercial about pollution. But environmental awareness also revealed serious problems. Love Canal in New York in 1978, a neighborhood built on top of a toxic waste dump. Children were getting sick, birth defects were occurring. The federal government had to evacuate and relocate families. It showed the real dangers of pollution. 3 Mile Island nuclear accident in 1979. A nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania had a partial meltdown. No one was killed, but the danger was real. It terrified Americans and changed the conversation about nuclear power. Some people embraced back-to-the-land movements, leaving cities, buying rural property, living more simply and sustainably, growing their own food, building their own homes, rejecting consumer culture. The environmental movement wasn't universally embraced. Some saw it as anti-business, anti-progress, but it had become a permanent part of American politics and culture.
Cultural shifts. The 1970s were called the Me Decade by writer Tom Wolfe, a decade focused on self, on personal growth, on individual fulfillment. After the activism and collective focus of the 60s, people turned inward. Self-help movements exploded. EST, Erhard Seminars training, promised personal transformation through intense weekend seminars. Hundreds of thousands of people participated. Transcendental meditation, yoga, Eastern spirituality. Americans were exploring alternative paths to fulfillment. The sexual revolution of the 60s continued into the 70s. More open attitudes about sex, more premarital sex, more casual sex. The pill had made sex safer from pregnancy. Social stigmas about sex outside marriage were declining. Drug culture was visible. Marijuana use was widespread, especially among young people. Some states decriminalized small amounts of marijuana. Cocaine became the drug of choice for wealthy professionals in the late 70s. Just Say No and the war on drugs hadn't started yet. Drug use was more tolerated, less criminalized than it would become in the 80s. Streaking, running naked through public places, became a bizarre fad in 1974. College students, sporting events, even the Oscars. It was silly, rebellious, and emblematic of the relaxed social norms of the era. Authority was being questioned in ways it hadn't been before. Government, police, teachers, parents, traditional authority figures were no longer automatically respected. The Vietnam War, Watergate, social movements, all had contributed to this skepticism about authority. It was both liberating and unsettling.
End of Vietnam era. The Vietnam War officially ended for American involvement in 1973. The last American troops left Vietnam. POWs came home to yellow ribbons and parades. John McCain, later a senator and presidential candidate, was among them. The relief and joy of families reunited after years of captivity. But the war left deep scars. Veterans returned to a divided nation. Unlike after World War II, there were no universal parades, no universal gratitude. Some people honored their service. Others protested and criticized them for participating in an unjust war. Many veterans struggled. PTSD, though it wasn't called that yet, affected countless veterans. Addiction, unemployment, homelessness became common among Vietnam veterans. The war had torn the country apart. It had killed over 58,000 Americans and millions of Vietnamese, and it had ended in defeat. The fall of Saigon in April 1975 was traumatic to watch on television. The last American helicopter leaving the embassy roof. People desperately trying to escape. The North Vietnamese army taking over the city. America's longest war had ended in failure. It would shape American foreign policy and military strategy for decades.
Presidents of the 1970s. 3 presidents served during the 1970s, each facing enormous challenges. Richard Nixon from the start of the decade until his resignation in August 1974. He opened relations with China, pursued détente with the Soviet Union, but Watergate destroyed his presidency and legacy. Gerald Ford from August 1974 to January 1977. He tried to heal the nation after Watergate. His pardon of Nixon was controversial, but may have helped the country move forward. The economy was troubled during his presidency. He seemed like a decent man, but faced enormous challenges. Jimmy Carter from 1977 to 1981. A Washington outsider, a born-again Christian who promised honesty and morality. He wore cardigan sweaters and gave fireside chats like FDR. He emphasized human rights in foreign policy. But he faced huge challenges. The economy continued to struggle with stagflation. The energy crisis continued. In July 1979, Carter gave what became known as the malaise speech, though he never used that word. He said America was facing a crisis of confidence. He was right, but Americans didn't want to hear it. And then, in November 1979, Iranian militants stormed the American embassy in Tehran and took 52 Americans hostage. They would be held for 444 days, released just as Ronald Reagan took office in January 1981. Carter seemed unable to solve this crisis. The failed rescue attempt in April 1980 was humiliating. The 1970s would end with Americans feeling uncertain, frustrated, and ready for change.
The 1970s had some memorable fads, some fun, some bizarre, all very 70s. Pet rocks in 1975. Yes, rocks. Regular rocks from a beach, packaged in a box with air holes and straw, sold as pets. They came with an instruction manual. How to house train your rock. How to teach it tricks. It was absurd. And it sold millions. Mood rings changed color, supposedly based on your emotional state. The color was actually just reacting to your skin temperature, but it was fun to believe the ring knew your mood. Streaking, running naked through public places, college campuses, sporting events, even the Academy Awards in 1974. A man streaked across the stage during the Oscars. David Niven quipped, "The only laugh that man will ever get is by stripping off and showing his shortcomings." It was a fad that was funny, shocking, and short-lived. CB radio craze in the mid-70s. Citizens banned radios in cars and homes. You had a CB handle, your radio name. You talked to truckers and other CB users. "Breaker, breaker, this is Rubber Duck, come back." It was a way to connect, to feel part of a community. Rubik's Cube arrived from Hungary in 1979, that colorful, twisting puzzle that drove people crazy. Millions tried to solve it. Some gave up in frustration, some became obsessed. Books and guides on how to solve it became bestsellers. Chia Pets came along in the late 70s. Terracotta figures that you spread with chia seeds and watered. The seeds would sprout, giving your pet hair or fur. Chia Pet. Wacky packages trading cards.
parodies of popular products, Crust toothpaste, Band Ache, plastered peanuts. Kids collected and traded them. Iron-on transfers for t-shirts. You could iron any image onto a shirt. Band logos, funny sayings, cartoon characters, making custom t-shirts at home.
Roller skating exploded in popularity in the 70s. Roller rinks were everywhere. You'd go on Friday or Saturday night, rent skates, the kind that went over your shoes with a key to tighten them. Or you had your own skates, sleek, fast, with bright-colored wheels. You'd skate around and around the rink in a circle. Disco music playing loud, lights flashing. The DJ announcing couple skate. Lights would dim, slow music would play. If someone asked you to couple skate, that meant something. Holding hands, skating together, maybe your first date. Roller derby was on TV. Tough women and men skating fast, hitting hard, scoring points. It was athletic, theatrical, and popular. Disco and skating combined perfectly at roller discos. You'd skate to Le Freak, I Will Survive, Stayin' Alive. Some people could dance on skates, spinning, moving backwards, incredibly skilled. Studio 54 in New York was the most famous disco. You couldn't just go, you had to be chosen by the doorman. Celebrities, models, the beautiful people. Inside, it was glamorous, excessive, decadent. Most people's disco experience was more modest. Local clubs with mirror balls and dance floors. You dress up, tight pants, platform shoes, maybe a sequin top. You dance to Donna Summer and the Bee Gees. Learning the hustle or other line dances. Everyone doing the same steps together. It was social, fun, athletic. Not everyone liked disco. Rock fans often hated it. Disco sucks became a rallying cry. The music, the fashion, the culture, it was divisive. But for those who loved it, disco was freedom, expression, joy.
Sports and recreation. Sports were hugely popular in the 70s, and they were changing. Muhammad Ali was the biggest sports star of the decade, the greatest. His fights were events, the Rumble in the Jungle against George Foreman in 1974, the Thriller in Manila against Joe Frazier in 1975. He was a fighter, a poet, a civil rights figure, a cultural icon. Billie Jean King wasn't just a tennis player, she was a feminist hero after beating Bobby Riggs. Baseball was still America's pastime. The Big Red Machine in Cincinnati, the Yankees dynasty, Reggie Jackson, Pete Rose. Football was becoming more popular. Monday Night Football started in 1970. Suddenly, football was prime-time entertainment. Howard Cosell's voice, instant replay, football becoming a TV event. The Olympics had triumphs and tragedies. The Munich Olympics in 1972 were marred by terrorism. Palestinian terrorists killed 11 Israeli athletes. The world watched in horror. The U.S. hockey team beating the Soviet Union in the Cold War context, but that was at the end of the decade. Little League and youth sports were growing. Parents coaching their kids, traveling to tournaments, sports becoming increasingly organized and competitive, even for young children. Recreation and leisure time were becoming more important. Tennis was becoming popular. The equipment, the clothing, the country clubs. Jogging became a fitness trend. People running through neighborhoods in tracksuits. Jim Fixx's The Complete Book of Running was a bestseller. The idea that you could be healthier by running regularly was revolutionary.
For those of you who lived through the 70s as young people or as parents, you lived through a time of transition and creativity. You adapted to change. You embraced new possibilities. You challenged old ways of thinking. You worked through inflation and economic uncertainty. You raised kids in a world that was changing faster than ever before. You navigated new roles and opportunities. You listened to great music, watched great TV, wore wild clothes, and had fun. The 70s may not have the nostalgia of the 50s or the cultural dominance of the 60s, But they were real. They were creative. They were important. And they're closer to us now than any other decade, except the ones that followed. If you were there, you know. Thank you so much for taking this journey through the 1970s with me. I'd love to hear your memories. What do you remember most about the 70s? What was your favorite song, your favorite TV show, your favorite fashion? Where were you in the 70s? What were you doing? Share your stories in the comments. Your memories are living history, and I'd be honored to hear them. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We've already explored the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. We'll be continuing with other decades. What decade would you like us to explore next? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing your memories, and thank you for being part of these important decades that shaped America.